And we're going to have a really great journey today over the next 4 hours. And if you can, I'd like if folks could put their phones away, and if you're rattling and eating food and acting like primates in the jungle, if you can suspend that for a little while. We will take a break. It's a 4-hour workshop, and we'll probably take a break at the 1.5, 2 hour point for about 15 minutes for a comfort break and get something to snack, and then we'll get back together until 7. Okay, so that's sort of the plan. And I do want to thank you for supporting the work. I think you guys are the core people who want to really drill deep on what we're doing. I want to welcome everyone on the webinar from around the world. There are thousands of people who will be watching this online as well. So the purpose of this workshop is really to give you an in-depth or more in-depth understanding of what the ultimate disclosure act is going to be. And that is open, direct, human to ET contact. And that's happening. We have tens of thousands of people around the world in our Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind teams. It's just volunteers get together, go out into the stars, use a set of protocols, and amazing stuff happens. I'm going to be showing you a lot of images and explaining what they mean and how contact is actuated, how you create this sort of contact. But I want you to think of it in terms of, in a sense, the ultimate civil disobedience act as well. Because when I first started doing this, I remember in 1992, after we had this event happen in Florida, and we had 4 craft just materialized they didn't move in like a plane, it's materialized in the sky. And you've all probably seen the video where the guy goes, "Holy damn hot shit." The good old boy from Louisiana. Well, that was a demonstration event for about, I guess, 60 people at a workshop for the weekend. And we were on a beach near Pensacola. And that event ended up on the front page of the paper and got kicked up to the intelligence community. And the intelligence community then contacted me. And their first question was, "What the hell do you think you're doing? And what gives you the right to do this?" And I said, "Well, I'm a free citizen of Earth. I have a mind, and I've had contact, and I'm not going to share with everyone else how it's done because it's really very simple." And they said, "Well, you don't have authority to." I said, "I don't need your goddamn authority." So, they were trying to rock me back, and if you push me, I'm going to knock you down. So the head of Army Intelligence was less than amused initially. And there were 3 people at the meeting. A member of the team was NSA. There was a CIA guy there and the guy who had been head of Army Intelligence. And they were basically trying to figure out, what is this kid doing? Because I'm a young doctor in my 30s, doing something very disruptive. Because the ultimate disclosure event would be to have millions of people who understand what you're going to learn today going out under the stars, making contact that signals to these interstellar civilizations that humans are ready for open contact. And it starts happening, and they cannot control that. That's a fractal that'll go viral. And so the intelligence community immediately recognized the danger of this to their agenda of secrecy, but also of the cover-up and the misdirect of the whole, we should be afraid of everything alien and all. They spent trillions of dollars brainwashing people for 70 years, as you heard yesterday, trillions. So here comes this young doctor who is throwing a monkey wrench in their great scheme. And first out of the gate, we have an event happens, and there are 2 Air Force people there. One's a colonel, a retired, and an Air Force pilot, and one was the Eastern Director of MUFON for the United States, who, interestingly, tried to get the report published in the MUFON Journal, and it was denied publication at that time. I don't think that happened now because I'm friends with Jan Harzan. But back in those days, they would not let this be published because it was too out there. Because the guy's using consciousness and meditation and thought and what does that have to do with, because we're talking about the old guard who want to go, kick the tires on the ET craft as if interstellar civilizations are using a Boeing 777. So, you read between the lines what I'm saying. So what we want to do today is to go from that reductionist, materialist understanding to the understanding you need to have to be an ambassador to the universe from humanity to these other civilizations. That's my purpose. And that's the overarching objective. But to get there, there's a lot you need to understand. Now, the intelligence community right away began to sort of try to interfere with what we were doing. And it's now gotten to where if I'm present, we're out at a site, we'll have military jets, helicopters within 100 feet of overhead, special forces sometimes coming in on the ground. But that's because I'm there. You can do it. Here's the nice thing about you not being me. There's a big target on my back. There are a lot of good reasons not to be me, but lots. More than I want to go into. Where's my therapist? No, I'm just kidding. But you're not going to have that kind of surveillance. So we're going to go through the security algorithms that we do on site also. Because there are systems that pick up ET craft when they come out through the crossing point of light. And we'll describe this a little later. And those technologies will then activate a intervention by the intelligence community. But they can't be everywhere at once. They don't have unlimited assets. They really don't. We have more assets. There are more of us than them, right? And so there's power in that. And this is what I want all of you to understand. You have the power. Don't think they do. We do. And I made that very clear. I remember at one point in the conversation, the head of Army Intelligence was being very bombastic and threatening. And I said, well, you know what? You have your plan, and we have ours. And I'll tell you which one will prevail. You lose, we win. It's just that simple. I said there's a plan that is cosmic, it's interstellar, it's divine, it's human, it's enlightened, and it's going to prevail. And you're going to fail. So you might as well get prepared for your failure, because it's coming. And that's how I spoke to him, very matter-of-factly. He was like, he wasn't used to, this young upstart whippersnapper talking to him that way. But I think that you have to empower yourself. And this is what I want you to do in the course of this 4 hours. Empower yourself and see yourself as on the vanguard of humanity making contact with these civilizations, and to have the skill set and the knowledge and the wisdom to do it and know what's going on when it happens, because that is not obvious either. So there's a whole cosmology that needs to be understood. Now, ultimately, after this initial kerfuffle, they tried to make nice and play nice. So a couple months later, astronaut Brian O'Leary and Maury Albertson, who co-founded the Peace Corps during JFK's time, and I hosted an event at a retreat center in Colorado where we invited all the UFO researchers from all over the world, thinking they might play nice. Oh boy. Out came the knives, and you had, intel operatives there like you can't believe, and this man shows up, the head of Army Intelligence, a former head, not really retired, you never retire from that position. And he tries to convince me to accept a $2 billion bribe in order to shut this operation down. Billion. That was when $1 billion was a lot of money. And now every week there's a billionaire unicorn being minted out of Silicon Valley, right? So, but in '92, $2 billion was a fair amount of money. And I was going, and he had it in a black budget slush fund in Eastern Europe. And I said, no, thank you. I'm not interested. And he went to my wife. And my wife is sort of like the epitome of noblesse oblige, and it's a doctor's daughter, and nice Jewish family who very well educated, New York, New Jersey, and went to Ivy League schools and private high schools, and all the privileges I didn't have as a poor boy in the South. I was the young boy toy. Anyway, outrageous. So So I, and went to her and said, will you convince your husband to work with us? And we have all this and blah, blah, blah. There was all this flattery, and that didn't work. And so within 30 days of me finally saying no and don't making me an offer like that again, the defamations began. On the internet, early internet, everywhere. Defamation of character, every kind of story. And I knew that was going to come. So you just kind of keep going. You don't let this interfere with what you're going to do. But that is actually how the Disclosure Project started. Because the friendly people in the intelligence community then approached me and said, wow, this guy really understands this stuff. Because this is not about going out and collecting a report from someone at a trailer park who saw a light in the sky last night. This is about going out there and becoming an ambassador to these civilizations openly and having it happen and having thousands and eventually millions of people do it where they're aware of it and the potentiality of it. And the awakening that is within human consciousness that allows that to happen. So this is a real threat to their plan. So the ultimate disclosure event is 1 million people or millions of people learning about what we're going to talk about today. And that is close encounters of the fifth kind, which is when humans initiate the contact and understand how it can happen. Now, once we had the intelligence community, we got on the radar of what we were doing, one of the friendlies approached me. I thought he was a spook trying to infiltrate me initially, and turned out to be someone genuinely supportive who is a Navy intel person. And so we set up a series of meetings to go to, for example, the Pentagon and to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to what was the Foreign Technology Division, where the Roswell remains were sent. But we went there not to learn what they had there, I already knew what they had there, but to ask them to deconflict their operations with ours, meaning we wanted them to stand down interference with our operations. And it's a very interesting story. This was in 1993 in September, and the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who later went on to become the Director of Naval Intelligence, which is a step up from there, believe it or not, set the meeting up. And they did not want to have the meeting at Wright-Patterson, and they were ordered to have it. And they were ordered to have it because the man knew what we were doing was serious, and we were seriously trying to do this in a way where there would not be conflict between our teams and military operations in any given area around the world, not just U.S. So that meeting happened, and it was a very interesting meeting because one of the officers there, a colonel, said, well, aren't you concerned that something might happen to you by the aliens when you're out there? I said, no, I'm more concerned something would happen to us from you. And also, if they were a threat, you and I would not be breathing the free air of Earth anymore, given the galactically stupid things our military has been doing. And he looked at me. And the intelligence officer that was there, Bruce Ashcroft, was just writing furiously. He was a civilian, allegedly a public information guy. He was actually intel. And so we began this process of saying, we're forming these teams, we're going to do it, and please stand down what you can. Now, of course, later I learned that there are people who were friendly to the concept of what we were doing who didn't have the power to stand down anything, because those unacknowledged projects do what they want. They don't listen to the head of intelligence joint staff or anyone else. So there's a balance that we're going to have to strike, and you'll find that that's what we do when we go out under the stars together. And the key thing about this is that you realize very quickly that where the action is in human consciousness and empowering yourself to be someone who can make contact with these civilizations and not be afraid. So I want to talk about kind of the ethical and philosophical underpinnings of what we're doing. The first is non-prejudice. We don't distinguish between any ET civilization. If they're interstellar and they're aware of Earth or have reached here, we're an ambassador to those people. Now, to the alienists and the racists and the fear-mongers who are afraid of this species or that species, and have you always noticed that the ones that are the good ones are always blonde and have nice boobs? I'm thinking of Bill Tompkins, and have, blue eyes. And the ones that look different from a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant are evil. This is naked racism. So the first thing you have to be is don't be a racist. And if you're a racist, you could probably leave now. Bye. Have a nice day. So, because they're not interested in you. These civilizations are not interested in the hate-mongering, racist element of the lunatic fringe of the UFO subculture. They're not. Just that simple. Now I'll just put it out there. It's blunt. I'm an ER doc. I tend to be very direct, and so I'll just put it out there. So the first underpinning of our philosophy is one universe, one people. We're all sentient, intelligent life. If there is a point of conflict between one culture and another, that should be resolved through contact and through discussion and through engagement. It is not going to be fixed down the barrel of a scalar weapon that could destroy both planets simultaneously. So we have to look at ourselves as peace ambassadors when we're doing this and cut through all the fear-mongering and what have you. Because if you go out there and you're afraid, that fear in of itself is going to stop the consciousness meditation process that enables you to engage the protocol that you're going to learn. Does this make sense? Fear is the mind killer. And I'll give you a great example of this. We had a woman come with us in England in 1992. And it was my first trip to the crop circles. This was a crop circle, by the way, our logo. And she was a psychologist, which I learned a first red flag. I'm sorry. But, I know hard science, ER docs always make fun of psychiatrists, but I'm joking. But, well, kind of. A little bit. And so she comes out, and we're there, and it's this like amazing series of things happen. So the paparazzi found out I was there, and so they were all trying to invade the site. And then there were the crappies. And I knew nothing was going to happen in that chaos of that setting. And about the time I had that thought, there was an ET craft that came into the sky and formed a cloud around it and caused the most hellacious rainstorm exactly over the farm we were using. And it flushed all the rats back to town. They all went... So all the dreck went out. So there were 4 of us that remained. And now we knew this was happening. We were looking at this. No one was looking at the sky. You could see this thing going like this, back and forth in this cloud. And it was an object, very, very low clouds, and it just created this storm right there. And it stayed there until everyone left, and then it stopped. So, of course, we got in our car, and, it's, of course, a right side drive, and I'm on the driver's side, and all of a sudden, there were 2 in my car, and myself and one other, and 2 in a car behind us in sort of a little farm road. And this man starts beating on the door. And I put the window down, and he says, "There's a spaceship in the field lit up like a bloody Christmas tree." And I go, "Oh, there is." And I look, and I thought he was joking. I thought he was just pulling my leg. And there's this 100-foot diameter disc, beautiful, in the field, about 10 feet above the ground, hovering maybe 100 yards to or so, 200 yards away. So I said, oh, great, they're here. So I hop out. Now, the psychologist goes, oh my God, they're here. I go, yeah, isn't that exciting? So I get a light and I start signaling to it, and it signals back. And I'm mentally asking it to come closer. And I do this. So I put my palms out like this. And you're welcoming. I don't have a weapon, and you welcome them. Your third eye, your heart chakra, and your palms, you send out this sort of cone of welcome. And here it comes, it's floating towards us, and all the hair on our bodies start standing on end. It's called piloerection. Sounds sexy, doesn't it? Your hair standing on end. And some of these medical terms are lovely. Anyway, and you could hear the wires that were near one of the power lines on the farm started buzzing with electromagnetic energy field. This thing was fully in this dimension. And but it just appeared there. It didn't fly in, it just pop, was right there in the field. So it had a kind of a dome on it, like a little cupola with some golden lights. And then there was lights going around the base of it that were like bleeding into each other, like going both directions. And it was beautiful. So this psychologist, this PhD psychologist, just freaks. She says, stop signaling to them. They're coming closer. I said, well, that's what we're here to do. She says, well, not that. I thought it'd be way up there. So she falls apart like a $3 watch. And forthwith says, I'm done. I later found out that she was involved in some UFO club that was doing abductionism and regressing people, and she had incorporated into her thing all this fear, gloom and doom, and that's what kicked in. Bang. And that was the end. But as soon as the ETs picked up on her fear, they backed off. And they were so beautiful. They backed off to the edge of the wheat field near the Avon River, and then they lifted up and disappeared into the mist. And then there was the clouds opened, and there was this beautiful golden orb light that stayed up there just moving and signaling to us at a distance safe for her. She felt that was okay. You see what I mean? And that went on for about an hour. Now the whole time that's going on, my compass is going around the dial counterclockwise. The magnetic north is turning. The whole magnetic field is torquing. Some weird stuff, cool stuff. So what I learned, now the next morning there's a note slipped under my assistant's door. It says, I'm going back to Ohio. This is too much for me. And she left. And we never heard from her again. So that's when I learned I probably need to train people before taking them out and having something like that happen. Because, I'm sort of childlike in how I approach things sometimes, and I think, oh, well, just do it, and I don't know I can't, so I just do it. It was like the first time I meditated, I just sat down and went into samadhi, and the teacher went, what are you doing? I said, aren't we supposed to transcend? Because I didn't know that you weren't supposed to, that you were supposed to make a big deal about it. So, see, everyone makes everything harder than it needs to be, and just do it. So what we have to understand is, if our operative paradigm is alienism, which is my word for interstellar racism, fear of other species, hatred of ones that you've heard rumors about, the absorption into your psyche of all the fear-mongering and war-mongering that is the stock and trade of the New Age and UFO subculture today, and Gaia TV and things of its ilk. You're never going to be able to do this. And that's why I'm addressing it right off the bat. So put my cards on the table, you can put yours, but this is the prerequisite to becoming an ambassador to the universe, is to be non-prejudicial, have no fear, and to learn to transcend what fear you may have incorporated into your intellect and into yourself through powerful meditation techniques, which we're going to discuss today and demonstrate. because you can transcend those fears. As Krishna said to Arjuna on the battlefield, a little of this eliminates all fear. And the this he was referring to is pure consciousness, the state of samadhi, that state of transcendent deep awareness. So with that state, you can become a spirit warrior, a Shambhala warrior, where you're not afraid of anything, which is how I'm doing what I'm doing. That's what I connect to. So that kind of spirit warrior state, it's not violent warrior, but this where you transcend fear and threat by being grounded in this transcendent infinite aspect of yourself. That is how you get out of the headspace, the intellect, and the fear. So that's the first. The second component to it is understanding that when we're doing our contact, we're welcoming all civilizations, not this one and that one. So we don't go out and say, we want the ones that look like Nordic ones. The ones that don't look like us, you stay away because I'm a racist. That dog don't hunt, as we say in North Carolina. So, and so we have to figure out, what is the proper attitudinal state to be in to make contact. And it's a very pure-hearted, innocent, accepting, open state, open-hearted state. Now people say, well, what if there are some that are nefarious and scary and harmful? I said, well, those are the ones I want to make contact with first. So let's make a distinction between the dilettantes who want to go out and see a UFO and the people who are sincere about being an ambassador for the purpose of universal peace, not peace on earth and peace in the cosmos, to these civilizations. And this is a very serious and sometimes painful discussion that we need to have, because the purpose of what we're doing with the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the CE5 initiative, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, is to create a cadre, a core of people who are going to make contact within this philosophical underpinning of universal peace. And if there was a civilization, I don't know that there is, but let's say there were some civilizations that were, if not overtly hostile, didn't much like humans right now, which I think could be excused for doing so. I mean, visit this planet, look through their eyes and look what's going on. I mean, but those civilizations need to have the best of humanity, show the best of the best people, show the face of humanity that's peaceful and that's enlightened and that is looking forward in a progressive way. That's what they're looking for. And so that act in and of itself is very healing. So even if you were to believe what has been put out there in this Manichaean good and bad alien universe of ufology and New Age claptrap, then you would still want to be, if you're a sincere ambassador to the universe, you would want to transcend that whole discussion and say, we're going to connect with and be an ambassador to all civilizations for the purpose of communication, contact, peaceful dialogue, and a relationship in the future that is peaceful. So for once, let humans take the high road here instead of breaking into warring camps of this one versus that one, this sort of duality that we like to break into. Now that's very hard for humans to do because we have thousands of years of our history of breaking into camps of, Irish Catholic versus Irish Protestant, or Sunni versus Shia, or white versus black, or gay versus straight. By the way, happy Pride. It's Pride weekend in Toronto. Or male versus female, the misogyny. Or this ethnic group versus the Hoodoos versus the Tutsis. Or whatever. We have this ingrained in our cultural experience to such an extent that we will find any triviality to organize ourselves into warring camps and kill each other. And there's thousands of years of kind of behavior that we have to overcome right now. Not only to live together on Earth peacefully and not blow it up, but to go into space peacefully. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the next step. So to get to that next step, you have to get to this understanding of what are the roots. So if you look at how different someone from Japan versus, say, southern Italy may be, or the Congo versus New York City, imagine the diversity that there is out in the cosmos. It's millions of orders of magnitude greater. So what's the point of commonality? Being sentient, conscious, awake. Not what you're aware of, but consciousness itself. And this is why the science of consciousness is the main thing we need to master today and understand, and why it is the science of the next millennium. All the other sciences have already been developed in black projects. Free energy, anti-gravity, materialization, dematerialization, interface with consciousness and technology and all that stuff. Those exist in human black projects, covert projects, I know that. So it's all, that's here. The fact it's not being used, but it's here. The big frontier is in the development of higher states of consciousness, the science of consciousness, and understanding that on a deep level. And it is that spark of the light of being sentient, the ability to be awake. It's very simple. People make this way too hard. So you can do a little Zen reduction here, where look, you see the room, you're having your thoughts, you have your body, you're hearing my voice. Take all of that away, and for a moment just shift and be aware of the consciousness, the pure consciousness, the quiet mind that is watching and listening, and all of this is playing on the screen of this sort of blank screen of quiet mind. See, that's all it is. That's what samadhi is. It's the experience of that pure state of consciousness. Now, when you look into the eye of the person, look at the next person next to you, just look in their eyes for a moment. I don't have anyone next to me, I'll look at you. See, and he's awake, and I'm awake. We're different people. We have different egos, different bodies, different backgrounds. But the consciousness whereby he's awake and perceiving me, and the consciousness whereby I'm awake and perceiving him, that is a singularity. That is a singularity. And that's been proven in physics. So the total number of minds in the universe is one. And this is Erwin Schrödinger, the father of particle wave theory, modern quantum mechanics, in 1908. And it has been proven that mind stuff, consciousness, is a singularity. And it's the singularity of the light of consciousness which is the foundation of our relationship with these other civilizations. Because their evolutionary path will be mostly different, not totally. Some are first cousins to humans. We can get into that if you wish. But some have no relationship, bioevolutionary. Their fund of knowledge, their life experience, their emotional nature, their IQs. I'm going to show you the picture of a Andromedan ambassador from the Andromeda galaxy, 2.5 million light years from here. And when I asked him what his IQ was, and he communicated telepathically and through an electronic system, and I said it's around 450, and he confirmed it was, which means I'm like half of a Down syndrome child. So, and I have a healthy respect for my intellect, but I understand that on the pecking order, you know, I'm a moron. So you have to laugh at yourself, you know, you realize, but with that said, the consciousness that humans have, the light of awareness, the spirit, that is in equal measure within all things. And our ability to experience that state of enlightenment and non-locality of mind, where you experience consciousness as an omnipresent field, that is the second operative requirement. So the first is this philosophy of non-prejudice, accepting all beings, transcending fear. But this other pillar, which is really primary, is the understanding of conscious mind, and how that every single person is awake, and that the awakeness, the essence of awareness within each person, when it's quiet, and when you quiet your mind and yourself and your ego and your emotions and your body down to quiet, and you just experience pure mind, that is universal. So when you look into the eyes of an ET, you're connecting to that level. It's a deeply spiritual, not religious, but deeply. I always say there's an inverse relationship between religiosity and spirituality, usually. Greer's theorem. But, the people who are most pious and make a big show of it are the least spiritual people you'll ever meet. Meanwhile, they're, boffing the choir boy behind the altar. But spirituality, so sorry if I offended any Catholics, but oops, I'll get a call from the Vatican tomorrow. But my point is, you have got to be able to connect to that level of conscious, quiet mind, and from there do these protocols, this technique that we'll be teaching. But you first have to understand it and know that this is nothing weird or foreign, or like you have to lay on a bed of nails for 40 years or something. You're awake now, those of you who haven't fallen asleep yet. And if you're awake, I'll go take a stick and hit you like a Zen master. Boink! No, I won't do it. I've threatened to before at our small trainings, but people on my team are laughing. They go, "Yeah, he will too." But that's not something foreign. That's something that is innate to being a human being, is the ability to be conscious and aware. So if you think about it, every moment of your existence, even in dream time, if you practice lucid dreaming, we're going to talk about this, you can practice being aware of the aware state. And it's amazing how quickly, in 6 months to a year, you can evolve a lifetime once you actually refocus yourself on this. Now, there are techniques that facilitate it. There are breathing techniques, there are meditation techniques, and there are thousands of those. And I tell people, I'm not a chauvinist about it. I was trained in a Vedanta and the Vedic, good Sanskrit meditation with mantras. But before that, I was kind of doing my own thing. And then I've studied Zen, breathing techniques, and various other types. And I had a friend who was a medical doctor, and she got into that state by playing the harp. She literally would go into this conscious state of expanded mind and unbounded transcendence by just playing the harp. And she would have this experience, and that was how she transcended on those notes into the unbounded. So there are many things, chanting, drumming, there are a lot of things. But the idea here is that once you set up a practice and you do it with discipline, you'll have breakthroughs that will be very fast if you give yourself to it. And if you understand what you're doing. I love, the George Santayana, who said, fanaticism consists of redoubling your effort when you've forgotten your goal. How true. Does this not pretty much describe most spiritual traditions and religions on earth? So, fanaticism is redoubling your effort when you've forgotten what the purpose of it was. So don't just do something that's sort of a catechism or something that's a rote thing. Be mindful and think about, what am I doing? Well, I'm sitting because I want to become quiet, because I want to be in touch with the conscious intelligence, the quiet aspect myself that is omnipresent. This one mind that is the source of the mind whereby we ourselves are awake. And this is the foundation of the CE5 protocols. It is also how you most accurately can remote view distant places and times, which we'll get into today, and also how you can then manifest contact with these interstellar civilizations. Because guess what? They ain't using, Steve Jobs, you must know this now, you're on the other side. They ain't using this thing. All right? This is 1844. This is telegraph. This is radio waves. This is rubbish. See, 160, 170 years of rubbish. Rubbish, rubbish, rubbish. They have electronics that interface seamlessly with consciousness and thought. Everyone in the intelligence community knows this, and when I started talking about this, I had people pull me aside and say, how do you know this? Like it was some deep, dark secret. I said, well, it's obvious. Think about it. How are you going to communicate across the vastness of interstellar distances? With that thing? Not. So it was an interesting little anecdote of when I was briefing the director of the CIA back in '93. And, the CIA director was sort of a functionary and a lawyer and very left brain, but his wife was the head of the National Academy of Science, or the chief operating officer. And she asked me at one point during dinner, it was about a 3-hour get-together, and she said, how are they communicating across these vast distances? And I could see where her mind was going. But I was almost afraid to tell her the truth, because I thought if I tell her the truth, I'll lose all credibility as a scientist. But if I tell her a falsehood, then that's not right to do. So very quickly, I did this calculus in my head, and I said, well, she asked the question, I'm going to assume she's ready for the answer. So I said, well, let's think about this. The Milky Way galaxy is 100,000 light years across. All right, has 100 billion stars. Let's say that you're just 1% of the way across the Milky Way galaxy, which is 1,000 light years. Now, 1,000 light years isn't a measure of time, it's distance. It's how far light, at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, travels in a year. So every second, 186,000 miles for a year. That's 1 light year. So 1,000 light years would be 1,000 times that. And that's 1% of the way through our own little galaxy, the Milky Way, where that has about 100 billion suns or stars like our sun. So at the speed of light, if you were from a star system 1,000 light years away, and you were using that phone or a radio signal or the SETI project's radio telescopes, and you spend billions on this nonsense, it would take 1,000 years to get a signal to that planet, and 1,000 years for them to say, oh, I got your signal, how are you today? So the time since the birth of Christ for 2,000 years would have happened just to say, hey, how are you doing? Fine, what's going on, bro? That just took 2,000 years at the speed of light. Therefore, that paradigm is non-functional. It is not what's operating with interstellar civilizations. As I said yesterday, all interstellar civilizations are also transdimensional. And one of the dimensions that they are passing through and are utilizing is the conscious thought realm. And that is a dimension. So we have to begin to look at the science behind interstellar communication and contact in a way that gets out of the 20th century and early 21st century box of materialism and reductionism and what have you. Because it's not going to let us answer even the most elementary questions of how are they getting here? How are they communicating? How do they appear in our atmosphere? How do they disappear in our atmosphere? How do they communicate? For that, you've got to understand what we're going to talk about today, which is this deep understanding of the science of consciousness and the associated interdimensional technologies that are interfacing with those dimensions. So for example, instead of having this interfacing with radio waves or microwaves. It's interfacing with directed thought or your bioelectric field, magnifying your conscious field. And that's why there are reports, the ETs will be at the console, touching and thinking, and with their thought, they'll guide the craft here and here. Actually, Travis Walton had that experience when he was taken onto the larger ship. Right? What is that? Well, it's not something that Boeing is putting on their Dreamliner. All right? So to all the scientists and engineers in here, it's fine, and I came through a classical training in science and medicine, but you have to then add to that a very broad and deep understanding of interdimensional, transdimensional sciences and the science of consciousness. So that's really a key element. But always return to the simplicity of it. Become aware, like you can sometimes feel someone looking at you, right? When you're looking the wrong, like my dog, I'll be staring at my dog from the house, and she'll be way out in the meadow. We live on 65 acres, and she'll feel it and turn and look right at me in the eye, right? People do too. So you can feel, we have intuitive abilities and conscious abilities that are not limited to our 5 material senses. So we want to awaken those when we're doing Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind protocols, because those are the ones that are most operative. Those are the central OS, operating system, of the extraterrestrial civilizations. Is any of this making sense, or is it too abstract? All right, I'm trying to make it, anchor it down here, because everyone's at a different place in understanding. So, when we're doing our meditation, we're not just doing meditation there's actually several phases to this. What most people end with where we begin. So the starting point for the CE5 protocols is after we've gone into a meditative state and are in an expanded state of awareness and in connected to that unbounded aspect of awareness, non-locality. Then we begin to expand the awareness in remote view, the space around us, outer space, other galaxies, other star systems. And if we connect or feel a connection or see or image or intuitively sense or even feel an ET craft, civilization, or person, then we do what's called the coherent thought sequencing, where we then show them our location. So you turn the remote viewing program, we're actually going to do this today. Where you then show them your location from their location, optimally connecting with their consciousness and through their eyes and through their instruments, and you guide them straight in and vector them in right to your location, right here in Toronto, or wherever you're from, like you would vector a jet into Toronto Airport, God help us all. So that, I flew here on Air Congo. Oh no, I think it was Air Canada. Oh, I'm so sorry. It took 12 hours to do an hour and 20-minute flight. Anyway, don't ask me. Friday was a nightmare. So, anybody have a private jet or at least a UFO? I got to talk to some of my guys in the black projects. Give me one of them. All right, but I need one bad. I'm so burned out on traveling. So that concept of being able to first go into deep quiet consciousness and be centered and calm, and then when you're in that state, then allow your mind to expand and sense what the 5 senses can't see or hear. Connect to it, and then through very coherent laser-like thought, guide them into your location. That's the core of the protocols, of the techniques. Now, saying it and doing it, very different things, but it's fun to experiment with it and form, you can form a team with 3, 4, 5 people. You don't need, 150, and go out into the stars and do this. And it's amazing the things that you will see and experience if you're ready. Careful what you ask for, you may get it. So, but be ready, because they work. They do work. Thousands of people are doing this. Thousands of people had CE5 experiences. And it's really exciting. my objective for the last 20 years is to have enough people who deeply understand this and can practice this on their own that I could drop dead and it wouldn't matter, that it'd be out there. Same thing I want to do with the free energy technologies. It's dispersed. So at this point, it is dispersed because there are thousands and thousands of people that have been trained to do this. I take people on these week-long expeditions. We just got back from one. We'll show you some of the images. It's great, this one. We're sitting there and doing our meditation, and then we see this flash, just a quick flash, like almost like a ball lightning in the circle, just outside the circle. And David Marconi, who did Enemy of the State, you know that movie? He was there, and he had a camera, a great camera, and the lens was open. And between Robbie and the man next to him, who had his hearing loss healed that trip, is this ET that pops in, and you can see him in the photograph leaning in from his dimensional bubble into the circle in the photograph. This just happened. All right, I mean, cool stuff. So, and it's real. So that's what we're talking about. So now you imagine millions of people getting this, understanding it, practicing it, and all this starts happening. And there's another whole art to being able to do the photography and videography on site, because it's like filming a 777 landing at the airport here. And then that's the next part of it, is understanding. Okay, so that's just a brief description of the protocol. We're going to actually do it later. Then there's the question of, how do these civilizations appear and disappear? Interesting. How many people were in the audience yesterday when I told the story of the Lockheed Skunk Works guy who did the astral projection and slammed into the craft? Most of you. Hilarious story. And then popped inside, and the ETs looked at him like, my God, why don't you watch where you're going? And it was like, you buffoon. But they were rather supercilious about it. I think they were not amused at this uncontrolled launch that he did, but clumsily leaving his astral body, as a physical body, and slamming into their craft. But when an ET craft is going beyond the crossing point of light, what does that mean? The light barrier, beyond the speed of light. It doesn't just like you're going down a runway and you're on a jet, you're going, 10 miles an hour and then 100 and then 200 or whatever, and you have rotate and you tilt and you take off. Okay. No, that's not what it does. They could be fully present in this room, and the only thing you would see would be an orb. Now, it could fold into space-time and be a 2,000-foot diameter triangle. We're going to get into this, and this is going to be the most mind-blowing discussion, because what you're going to realize is space, there's a plasticity, of stretchability to space and time. And when you are enfolded within space-time in another dimension, you can move from one point in space and one point in time to another, almost instantly. Because you're not doing it in straight line, and you're not going through a wormhole either. Your spacecraft and everyone on board is resonantly shifting through electronics into this higher frequency that's beyond the speed of light, that's in the realm of scalar but beyond, that interestingly closely approximates the experience of a lucid astral projection or a lucid dream state. It's that kind of substance. And then it can go from that to being 3D materialized. So I remember one time we were at Mount Shasta in California, and we had these, we were up at our house late at night having conviviality and bebidas. And it was about 3 in the morning, 3:30, and we were out on the deck. And we were just there, and maybe 50 yards away, a craft fully materialized, but instead of it being a disc like this, it was on vertical. And it appeared and went and dematerialized in the meadow right off the deck. We all saw it. we were whooping and hollering, oh, they're here again, and of course we woke up the neighborhood and got evicted from the house from previous next year. But anyway, but because it's 3 a.m. I never go to bed before 3 or 4. And it was so amazing because it demonstrated to everyone staying at the house with me that it was there all the time listening to our conversation. It chose to unveil itself, as it were, by shifting a little bit into this dimension and then materializing and then moving across the field and then dematerializing. It was huge too, by the way. It was not like a little thing. It was the whole thing. Bing, boom, boom. So when you're out making contact, you may or may not have a craft that materializes in 3D. It may appear as an orb that appears. It may appear as an energy field that looks like a heat disturbance in the desert that's the shape of a craft. For example, when Colonel Corso at White Sands, where the atomic weapons were first being tested in 1956, and I read these in his personal notes at his home. He had an encounter where during broad daylight, a craft was picked up on radar, came in, and landed out on the range in New Mexico. And he goes out there in his Jeep, and he's, a young, brash officer in the Air Force, and the craft is there, fully materialized, solid, sun shining off of it, seamless. And then it dematerializes, and all that's there is what looks like a heat wave disturbance in the air within the shape of the craft. And then it phases in, ding, and it's back in this dimension. And then ding, disappears. And it does it several times, showing him what they can do. And then it stays in this dimension, and ET emerges out of it and says to him, and he says, "Who goes there, friend or foe?" They're going, dude, it's like so lame. But anyway, so, and the ET says, "Neither." To you, but the ET was there wanting them to stand down their radar systems that were scalar weapons that were interfering with the ETs and had resulted in several crashes. And so Corso said, and this was all taking place through a little box that was on the ET that was a thought-actuated technology that was electronics. And so telepathic, but not really, it was electronic. And the ET, Corso said, "Well, what's in it for me?" And he admitted, very brash and kind of egotistically. And the ET said, "A new world, if you can take it." Great title for a book. A new world, if you can take it. Well, that was 61 years ago. I think it's time we take it. It's time for a new world. Not a new world order, but a new planet. All right? So that's what you need to begin to wrap your mind. How do these ET craft manifest? Well, you want to hear more weirdness? So one time we were at Mount Shasta, and I'll play this for you, but we're sitting in circle, we're doing the meditation, we've done the remote viewing, and we're there after the vector, where we've invited them. Suddenly, there's this tone that comes out of thin air, like an electronic crystalline tone, beautiful, that materializes in the air. And it goes from one side of outside the circle to the other. And everyone with their eyes shut, what they see in their mind, the tone materializes in their imagery in their mind, a spherical, pearlescent, almost gunmetal gray, but pearly looking sphere that goes bloop, 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 right across the circle and back to Mount Shasta. Everyone saw it. Everyone had this experience. They heard it, but the sound manifested the form mentally. Now, with a little more of a click, little frequency click, the whole thing would have been solid in this dimension, but we had a lot of military surveillance on site. So it stayed in that dimension. Is this Getting too weird? No. We ain't started yet, honey. Let me tell you. So I'll show you weird. Now, so the high strangeness that Dr. J. Allen Hynek talks about associated with the ET and UFO phenomenon is because it's only strange because we don't understand it. And let's be honest, if you to take your iPhone or this video screen and show Thomas Jefferson this, you probably burned at the stake as a witch. It would be sorcery. It'd be magic. And as Arthur C. Clarke said, any civilization sufficiently advanced to get here, all their technologies and the manifestations of it would look like magic to us. And so, as I began to explain all this to the CIA director and his wife, and the CIA director, I lost him. But the wife, and when I described that really what they're doing is that they're using these other dimensions, but in a routinized way, where it's routine, to have electronics that go beyond this three-dimensional space, time, to in through other dimensions that interface with consciousness and thought as accurately as we're interfacing with our cell phones, with radio towers, and with each other. And she looked at me and she said, I knew it had to be something like that. Now this is very mainstream science lady, head of the chief operating officer of National Academy of Sciences, the most prestigious scientific group in the world, one of the most. And so that's when I realized, I think people are ready to hear this. We don't need to sort of cover up in the UFO community any longer the truth about transdimensional, interstellar, ET phenomenon. Because if you just are studying the physical phenomenon that we can understand from 20th century and early 21st century human sciences, you're going to miss 99.9% of it. Every time, all the time. So this fund of knowledge, this field of knowledge, let's call it, which is a big field that we're going to harvest here today, that has to be mastered in order for you to go out and understand what's going on around you. Because otherwise, you're sitting there, you're doing these protocols, and all of a sudden, there's an anomalous tone that moves around you, and then bing! There's a camera running, and in the camera image is an ET there waving at you. We're going to show you an image like this. Or something that looks like an orb. Now, I don't mean the orbs people take photos with flash photography. That's dust particles and insects 99.9. None of the camera work we do has any light, flash, boom. It's all in pitch black. So that's really how Bijou, the ET that is from Andromeda, appeared a few years ago at Joshua Tree. Is that we were taking a break, and I went out in the East Field in Joshua Tree, and this thing the size of a grapefruit appeared right on my right shoulder, right beside my right shoulder, about a foot from me. And a couple other people saw it. It just blipped in and out very quickly. I went, oh, they're here. And so I said, well, we need to get, and it followed me. It was for a few seconds up the path going back to the group. I said, we need to get the group back together because they're here. And the senior people who've been on many of these understood what that meant. The new people were going, what? No. So we get there, and all of a sudden we get back, and we hear 4 or 5 people, not human, talking right outside our circle. But you can't see anything. And I had, like military grade, you have to do the Homeland Security stuff in the United States to get them, the night vision. Nothing there, but just there's a group of ETs talking right outside the circle. But they were not materialized in the flesh yet. So a member of my team, Raven Nabulsi, has a camera. She puts it on a 3 or 4 second shutter open and asks them to appear in the camera. And one of them does. And you can see there's an orb and a cone of light that illuminates the chairs, and with the sleeping bags on it, because it was really cold. We were up very high in November out in Joshua Tree Wilderness. And there's this ET floating outside the circle, waving. He's floating along smiling. And he has a teleportation thing on his head. You'll see it. So the whole thing is so amazing. And it's like, but no one with their naked eye saw anything. We had the orb appear. We heard the voices speaking, not any language anyone knew. Someone took this picture and asked the ET to appear in it. He did. And there it is. Most important picture in the ufology history, actually, because it was a senior ambassador from the Andromeda Galaxy. Of course, no one in ufology knows about it because this stuff isn't possible. Well, it is possible. And we're doing it every single day. So that's the kind of experience, how they can evolve. Now, on the other hand, it can go from something that strange to something like we're sitting in a circle at that same spot another year, and we're in this deep meditation, and a craft materializes about 50 feet to the east of the circle, so low that if I had stood on my chair and jumped up, I could have touched the underside of it. And it comes over the south end of the group. There's about 30, 40 people there, and it's making this strange sound. It goes almost like a didgeridoo. And it's exactly like that. And it passes over, no lights on it, totally unilluminated, and passes to the west side of the group and dematerializes in thin air. Now, I wish we had a camera running at that time. We didn't. But it was so close you could have touched it. It was fully materialized. Another time we were there, and there were 4 ETs without their craft. They were teleported there that were physical, I mean in the flesh, and standing by one of the Joshua trees. And we looked, and I thought 4 people from our group had gotten up from their seats to go pee or something. And I looked around, all the seats were there, and it was 4 ETs. And when we drew attention to them, and when people got a little too excited, they just dematerialized. Because they're afraid that a bunch of giant gorilla primates will stampede them, kill them. So, no, this is true. So part of the protocol is stay calm, don't do anything sudden, because they've had bad experiences with humans doing things that end up in bodily harm or death. So it's a very serious part of the protocol is to stay where you are, stay centered and calm in that expanded state of consciousness, and let them come as close as it's safe for them to come. Very important part. Don't go rushing towards them. So these sort of experiences, people say, how many times does something like that happen? I said thousands of times. And we never go out for a week where we don't have contact, ever. This thing in Arizona, every single night. And then people in the rooms, and it's like, it's amazing. So but it happens in ways that are not like what you're thinking. Because if you read the UFO literature and you're locked into the paradigm of 3D materialism of the 21st century, you're not going to understand it. So this is why I'm trying to share with you the sort of weird ways that these civilizations appear in this dimension from their star system. Now, added to this, and I call this the cosmological indigestion that's going on, is the fact that there are experiences people have with interdimensional beings that aren't extraterrestrial. So there are extraterrestrial biological beings from physical planets with physical star systems and physical spacecraft that can dematerialize, if you will, and go through various dimensions and arrive here that are ET. There are other intelligences that are from other dimensions that are not extraterrestrial, that can sometimes appear in similar phenomena. Does this make sense? And they become conflated. A very obvious example would be poltergeist. Now, I was in the ER once, and the nurses called me a warlock sometimes because I did all this kind of cool stuff with patients that they knew I was doing. I started a heart once when nothing else would work. Boom. And so that was a trip to work with. But so this man was in trauma room 1 and had, I think he had been stabbed or shot. I can't remember. But anyway, he died, and we couldn't save him. And he had been very drunk, and it was a traumatic death. And so, he was a direct admit to the morgue, as we say, instead of to the floor. And a couple hours later, the ER is completely empty for a moment. And all of a sudden, in trauma room 1, there's this ruckus. And the cabinets open, and he's dead now, but his spirit body starts throwing IV bags out. And he goes and turns on the EKG machine and the IV pump. And the nurses are going, "Is that what you think?" I said, "Yeah, that's what we think it is." So I connected to the most great light, the great spirit, and put an energy of peace and love and calm to that guy and sent him into the light, and it stopped. And I did that. The nurses saw it. But that was something, now that wasn't an ET phenomenon. It was the residua, the spirit aspect of someone who had died a traumatic death, who was mad as hell, who went in there and tore up the room, was tearing up the room. Now that was witnessed by me and several other nurses. Now we didn't put it in our medical notes. Now a lot of doctors have had strange experiences like that. You're not going to see it in the medical record because you don't want to lose your license. But it happens. So that was a human who had dropped the body and was in another dimension, the dimension of the spirit world, but was still connected enough to this one and was angry enough that it could do things and interface with this dimension. So those experiences have all gotten conflated as alien. So what I'm saying is we need a proper differential diagnosis. So in medicine, it's like if you only have one thing you know about that could be chest pain, a heart attack, you're going to miss pleurisy, a dissecting thoracic aneurysm, a pulmonary embolus, 115 other things. So an unskilled physician is going to miss 114 of the 115 things, so he doesn't know about it. So we need to be skilled physicians. We need to have an adequate operating fund of knowledge to know the difference between, is that ET? Is it some being from another dimension, not ET? Is it one of our ancient ancestors, Native American or something, on site? Because you're doing these shamanic deep conscious meditations. Is it something from a covert program, a program life form, or a man-made UFO, or some electronic weapon system that's doing something? What is it? And if you don't know that there's all these other possibilities, you're not going to know what it is, because you're not going to even ask the question. You're going to assume it's something that it's not. So this is the virtuoso level, like a violinist at an orchestra. This is the virtuoso level of, this is not a skywatch thing. You go, oh, look at the sky. No, this is the virtuoso level of understanding ourselves, our world, other dimensions, other realities, and the ET reality. So the ET reality is this. They are, if they're interstellar, meaning they're able to go from their world to ours, they are by definition trans-dimensional or interdimensional. But when they're in that form, it means that they could appear in ways that could be conflated with or confused with an interdimensional phenomenon or a poltergeist phenomenon. And you need to know the distinctions. And this makes people very uncomfortable because it gets into so much weird stuff all at once. But it's the high strangeness is where the real lessons are. But the discernment is so necessary. Just like we need to also have discernment. I remember when I was at Stan Romanek's house, and Ricky and I were there in Denver, outside Denver, and there was a MUFON investigator there, and his wife and Stan, and he showed us this videotape, which has been absconded with by in Disney, and which I'd love to show to you because it was so clearly fake. And this recording of someone calling him with a recorded British voice that said, "Stan is one of the fake ones." It's one of the fake ones. He said, what does this mean? I said, it was what I've been talking about for 25 years. He said, what do you mean? I said, most of these things that are invading people's homes and doing this scary stuff are manufactured by the intelligence community. They're programmed life forms, and they're man-made aliens. They look like an alien, but it was walking kind of like this. Remember, Ricky? The way it moved? Absolutely amazing. And immediately I said, well, that's one of the man-made ones. Now, all along the UFO subculture, an alien was in his house. He was on Larry King and some of the other talk shows and showed this this alien that popped up in the window, very scary, and popped down. Boop. That's from the IC, intelligence community. So if you don't understand this, you might as well go home. Because that's the dominant phenomenon being foisted into literature and on the internet and through Gaia TV and what have you that you're going to see. Now, this offends a lot of people, and I don't give a damn. And here's why. Because I'm not here to be mayor of Crazy Town. I don't care how popular what I'm saying is. I'm here to tell you the truth, and I am telling you the truth. And so if you aren't aware of that as a possibility, and this then adds another whole part of this. What are the capabilities of the IC? If you don't know what those capabilities are, you're going to be deceived. They do have anti-gravity craft, and those have been used, as Doty admitted, in false flag operations and in staging abductions and home invasions. They do have these creatures that look like grays or reptilian or this and that are also made in the intelligence community, and those have been used. In the earlier days, as he said, they would take people with certain deformities and do really good makeup, or people who were very short stature, and have them invade people's homes. In fact, I personally met a man who was on a special team doing abductions. I think it was back in the 60s or 70s. And he was so small, and they used him, and they would make him up to look very ET on board an anti-gravity craft made by Lockheed Skunk Works and EG&G. And they would then do various abductions. And he admitted to being on these abduction squads decades ago. So this is no news here, except it's been covered up by the UFO community. But no one wants to admit that this would be possible, because the truth is much stranger than the fiction that you've been taught. So you have to know that possibility exists. Because if you're out there doing this and you start having an actual ET event, the intelligence community, if they pick up on it, may superimpose a fake event, a decoy to confuse you. So if you don't know, if you don't have a differential diagnosis just, in a symptom complex, all the different things that could be, all right? So if you don't have that in your fund of knowledge as a possibility, you're going to be tricked every time, every single time. I don't care how many years you've been doing MUFON investigations. I don't care how many years you've been an experiencer. If you don't know that this is a possibility, you're not going to know, is it real? Is it Memorex? Is it a fake one? And I loved it. It literally was saying to him, warning, Stan, it's one of the fake ones. It's one of the fake ones. And I think what had happened, he may have had some experiences with actual ETs, and then they come in and piggyback the fake ones on to confuse his experience. So you have to be aware of this. Now, this was played on me also in 1994 after I was briefing the Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein, who was funding the abduction and mutilation groups in the United States and around the world, the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein. And it was interesting because he had asked me, would I meet with him, and I called him at his castle, and I was so surprised because the butler, whoever, immediately put the prince on. They don't have a king there, it's the crown prince. And Prince Hans Adam and I talk, and he says, I don't want to talk about this on the phone, but let's meet. And I couldn't get over there, and it took a few months. But in July of 1994, he was in New York, and I went up there with one of my daughters, because back in those days, they were little, and I would take them dates with Daddy. So I said, her name translates to princess, and mine, Stephen, is Prince-like, and so we were going to meet the Prince, and we thought that'd be funny. So we go up and meet with him at the Pierre Four Seasons there at Fifth Avenue by Central Park. And we're there, and he starts telling me these things about, you know, how when Paris de Cuellar was abducted out of his limousine, the UN Secretary General, in 1989, and he didn't know that that was a military, paramilitary, human abduction. And the reason he wanted to meet with me was to tell me that my efforts at disclosure would not be allowed because the ETs wouldn't allow it. Because at the time that abduction happened in the fall of '89, Paris de Cuellar and Papa Bush and Gorbachev were planning to do a big announcement that we're not alone. And according to him, and he was on the committee discussing this, Paris de Cuellar, this was in Bud Hopkins, one of his books, he didn't name him, but I know it's Paris de Cuellar, was abducted out of Midtown Manhattan at 3 in the morning. Well, what they didn't know, which my intelligence sources, which are amazing, knew, is that the guy who was in his security detail was the son of the red-headed sergeant that threatened to kill everyone at Roswell. Remember the one that said you won't find the bones scattered in the desert? So he was in the system, the Majority Intelligence Committee. And he was there setting up the on-site electronics for an abduction that was human of the Secretary General. And when they got the Secretary General on this ET craft that was not ET, he was told, if you don't stop what you're doing with this plan to disclose our presence, we will abduct every world leader involved, including the President of the United States. And Prince Hans-Adam von Liechtenstein told me that this blew up like an atomic bomb in the Bush White House, and they pulled the plug on everything. Now this sounds like science fiction. It actually happened. Now he didn't know that that was an alien craft with an alien and not an ET. See, alien to me means fake. I use the word alien to connote the programmed life forms and the man-made UFOs. Because it's such a xenophobic word, I hate the word alien. But it wasn't ET, it wasn't extraterrestrial, it wasn't interstellar. It was man-made, posing, and it stopped the whole process. That was in November of '89. Interestingly, in January of 1990 is when I was visited in my house by an ET who asked me to start this project. So I always tell people I was sort of like the last stop on the F train, because this got hijacked by people who couldn't figure out they were being played. So you say, how could this happen? Isn't someone like Bush read into these? No, he's a mid-level apparatchik, like Senator John Warner, a mid-level functionary. At the deepest levels are these other groups that have these technologies simulating ET contact that are alien events, simulating programmed life forms, simulating this. And they're very, very good. Now, those have been fully operational for 50, 60 years. 1954, October, is when we mastered gravity control. That was almost 63 years ago. So we have to begin to realize that trillions of dollars and a deliberate agenda to deceive, to penetrate the UFO subculture with counterintelligence, disinformation, and with an agenda to establish the foundations, not of universal peace, but of interplanetary war. That's what's been driving 60, 70 years of the covert agenda. And we have all been victims of this. And I was in my early days till I figured this out. But by 1994, I figured this out, because one of the things they learned not to do with me is to play that game. So that night, after Prince Hans-Adam, he and I had a sort of, not a debate, but a discussion about this. And I said, well, I don't think it's quite what you think it is. And it turns out that his brother had been abducted out of the castle by a fake alien staged abduction event, which caused him to hate the ETs. And he said, the reason I'm funding Bud Hopkins and John Mack and all the abduction groups and the mutilation research and all the things to get that out is that we want enough people to hate the aliens so that we can justify an interplanetary war which would precipitate the return of Christ. Now, I'm quoting. And he's Opus Dei, the far right-wing group at the Vatican. And listen to this. And he said, the Pope John Paul would go to his castle and do masses and everything. And he told me that this is how we can create such chaos in the world that would force Christ to return. Or if you're Orthodox Jew, a Messiah or what have you. So that's part of the secret agenda. As bizarre and batshit crazy as it sounds, it's what's operational. That's what's operating. This is why they don't care if the environment goes kaput, because if things get bad enough and 5 billion people die, Christ will have to descend on a flying saucer. No, this is the thinking amongst the eschatologists. Eschatology is the study of how the earth will end. So amongst the eschatological lunatic fringe of the covert world, this is what you're dealing with. Except it gets worse, but I don't want to scare you off totally. But this is, I haven't even scratched the surface. So this experience, now guess what happens that night? Oh, he did have a bit of insight at one point where he said, of course he has a private jet. He says, I go all over the world where there's a wave of UFO sightings, and they appear before I'm there, and they appear after I leave, but they're never there when I'm there. He says, I wonder if it's my attitude. And I said, well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Your Highness. I think you've just hit the nail on the head right there. And there was a moment of insight. There was a moment of insight on his part. But anyway, he didn't convince me of this chicanery, and he was trying to kind of turn me to the dark side. I hate to sound Star Wars-like. It doesn't work because I'm too clever I've had enough experience to know real versus Memorex. However, that night, I was targeted in my bedroom. So I was at the St. Moritz Hotel on Central Park South, and my daughter was in another part of the room, and I was there, and there was a window. And I was awakened in the wee hours, and there was a directional energy beam coming in, and it was projecting the most evil, terrifying energy and threatening I've ever experienced. And they were trying to abduct me. And I knew it was man-made, and I knew it was classified projects, and I knew it was an electronic warfare system, which they can do. They can do all this through electronics. And it was terrifying. And so what I did, I sort of called on the power of God, actually, and prayed, and then I meditated and transcended, and it stopped. Because guess what? If you, the drop, become the ocean, they can't seize the ocean. They can only get the drop. Got it? You want to know how to stop these things? Transcend. Let the drop become the ocean. When you become the ocean, they can't access that. They can access your ego, your individuality, what have you. But if you just, it's like the Zen saying, yield and overcome. It's like Aikido, yield and overcome. And so I did that, and it stopped. But then I'd come back into waking state, and they'd hit me again, and again, and again, and again. It was horrible. So I know what they're capable of. This is not theoretical. And I only describe it not to scare the bejesus out of people, but just to give you an idea of how far they will go to deceive. Because they were wanting me, they thought that little trick would make me become a fear-mongering, alien-hating, abductionist, running around like a chicken with my head cut off. And all it did is tip their hand to how they operate. Now, it was a painful experience for me to figure out how they operate, but I learned. So what I did was track back to source. Remember that phrase, track back to source. So something like that happens if you're in a state of remote view capability. You meditate, go in, you track back to source, and I could see who was doing it, where, and what the technology was. Zap. Coming out of a UGB near Provo, Utah, Dugway. Psychotronic, radionic, electronic warfare system. So it didn't fool me at all. But I'd say 99.99999% of the population would have been fooled, would have been terrified, would have been convinced it was alien, and on and on and on. Now, I am the most hated person in the UFO space for talking about this, because everyone has a belief system. We're all addicted to having a new category of people to hate. It's not politically correct anymore to hate gay people or black people or this ethnic group or that ethnic group, but it's politically correct to hate aliens. This is the last card they have to play. And this is what they are. They played everyone like a fiddle. Okay, and that's what we have to resist. We have to resist this darkness, and we have to embrace the truth. And the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. Who was the feminist that said that? Gloria Steinem. And I think this is what we're wanting to go to. We're wanting to clear the air on this before we get to these deeper understandings. Now, the other part of it is on the other side, and this is now 27 years of us going out under the stars, making contact, and having all these kinds of experiences. We've never been harmed. We've never been threatened. It's been nothing but beautiful. People have literally been healed, like this man on this last event a couple weeks ago had years of hearing loss, and he was completely healed by a contact event that happened in Oracle, Arizona, when we were there a few weeks ago. We have had the most beautiful experiences with the actual ETs, and they are it's like something out of a movie, and it's beautiful. And yet I find so many people when I do presentations go, "Aren't you afraid that the bad ones will come and get you?" I'm going, it's like, doing, haven't listened to a word. But no, and I'm not. But I think that this is why let's take the collective experience of 27 years of thousands of people going out under the stars, none of whom have been harmed, as opposed to what I've described to you, which is absolutely true, that the intelligence community has the capability of doing, which is very harmful and terrifying. So let's just get clarity on that and just put that aside, so that when we go out under the stars to make contact with actual ETs, we're in a state of peace and in a state of calmness and beyond fear. And part of it is intellectual and having this understanding and clearing the air. Part of it is the experience of that state of transcendence where a little of this eliminates all fear, where we can transcend our own fears, which all humans have when you're encountering something strange. And I've had many people come on these expeditions that I lead for that are week-long expeditions. We'll probably do another one or two this year. I don't know where. And they'll say, well, I'm really afraid to have an encounter with one by myself, or if it's too close. I said, well, they'll find a way to do it so it's not frightening. But they will make contact to the level that you are ready, and they're not going to be invasive. I'll give you one example. We were at Borrega Springs outside Palm Springs in a really dark area, and there were a group there. And there's two people who came who were a married couple. One was a fireman in New York City and the other a police officer. Saw the earth. Wonderful people. Not, they weren't crystal waving, new age, shamanic, doing ayahuasca. They were like police officers, and firemen. And, just saw the earth. But they were interested in this, and they had had a sighting. And so they came, and they were very pure-hearted. So they went out the first night, sort of introductory. I told them, and then at the very end, I always say, as you're going to sleep, use the CSETI contact protocols as you're going into sleep to ask the ETs to come, if you're ready, into dream time and also into your room if you're ready for them to manifest in your room. And they, very pure-heartedly and innocently and faithfully, did that. And they wake up in the middle of the night, and there are two ETs in the room at the base of their bed materialized. And for about 2 hours, they sit there and telepathically have this discourse and conversation. Yeah. So, that is beautiful. And this was not then dream. They actually woke up, and they could hear this humming. The craft was partially materialized outside where they were staying, out in the desert. So, this is the sort of thing that happens, but they did it because they were so innocent and pure-hearted. They didn't have fear. It's like an ER doc. If you're a cop in New York, you're afraid of what? You want to be afraid of something? Come see what goes on in the ER on Saturday night. So, take a look around Syria or anywhere. So I think that we have this ability to pull all this stuff that we've been exposed to, that is the counterintelligence disinformation nexus that is designed not only to shut people down because of fear, but make them not go out and make contact. Because if you really believed there was this harmfulness out there, you're not going to go out in the middle of the wilderness with 2 or 3 people and ask them to make contact with you, would you? It stops humans being empowered to be ambassadors to them and to make contact, bypassing, guess what, the military-industrial complex and the intelligence community. So this is why the Ultimate Disclosure Act, all of you can do. You may not be able to control what your Prime Minister Trudeau does or what Trump does or whoever, but you have control over this and you can do this. But you have to get out of your own way. It's like the meditation techniques and the siddhis, that what are called SIDDHIS, the Vedic powers and abilities. There's a wonderful story of a master wanting to teach his students how to levitate and walk across a body of water. And there was this one that was perseverating, intellectualizing, fear that he would drown because he didn't know how to swim. And the master turned to him and said, "Leave thyself behind and then walk upon the water." So you kind of have to go beyond yourself into this greater aspect of yourself. And it is in a sense, a really shamanic journey to be an ambassador to these civilizations and to experience that state of consciousness. Does that make sense, folks? Yeah? Okay. And that's that. Once you accept that and then you begin to practice it, it becomes so easy. It's one of the easiest things to do, and people make it much harder than it should be. So what I tell people is try to do it in a way that is really in flow consciousness. So where you're doing your meditation, you're going to do the expansion of awareness. You then do this protocol, which we're going to do before we leave this afternoon. And you're doing it in a state of effortlessness with an affirmation that you can do it. Most people do not achieve the state of consciousness that is latent within them. Let's just say it's a latent state, this state of higher consciousness and unbounded mind, non-locality of awareness. Because they are telling themselves, I'm not Ingo Swann, who I knew personally. But it doesn't matter. You can have the capabilities Ingo Swann and more within 6 months if you believe you can. Now, if you tell yourself you can't, you won't. Because, the old saying, as ye have faith, so shall your powers and blessings be. If you believe you do not have the ability, you're not. And even as a doctor, if I were to believe I cannot get this chest tube in, and I'm there, I would keep glitching because I'm telling myself it's this negative feedback. So you have to let yourself have the ability and affirm to yourself that your birthright as a human being is that you're conscious, you're sentient. You have all the spiritual capabilities of anyone in the cosmos, or the most enlightened person that's ever walked the earth. And that is within every single human being. Whether it's developed or not has to do with whether one puts any attention to it, all right, and also believes it's possible. And also then is a disciplined person to practice it. It's sort of like, I have my workout routine. I bench press 410, leg press 900. Back row 468, sort of a beast. And I like that. It's good therapy for me. I like being an animal. Why not? It's fun. Anyway, but you don't start off back rowing 468 pounds. Maybe you start with 100 or 50 or I don't know. So 5. But what happens is that if you see you can do it, and then you practice and you practice and you do it, you do it. And you do it naturally. And the same thing, the corollary to the sort of natural bodybuilding thing for men, women like doing this too, I suppose, but is to understand that mentally, the consciousness muscle, the ability to be awake and to experience these various dimensions and to remote view and do telepathy and to see the future, and all of this It's all latent within you, but it isn't going to happen by you sitting on your couch looking at boob tube, looking at the television and looking at your smartphone. You have to actually practice it. So, and if you give some practice to it, you'll be astonished at how quickly. Because once you understand that consciousness is omnipresent, then you say, oh, I have an opportunity all over the place, like little synchronicities. For example, you're driving down the highway and you want to know where the highway patrol are so you don't get a ticket. You just sort of remote view where they are and feel them. I haven't gotten a ticket in 30 some years because that's what no, I do. And I sense, I can feel like a dog senses, how dogs, they sense, they know. So I do that when I'm driving. So you learn to do all kinds of fun things. So you can, your phone rings, instead of looking at it, just take a split second and feel, who is it? You see what I'm saying? You begin to practice that muscle, exercise that muscle of intuitive knowing and the conscious mind being non-local. And every single day of your waking life, and dream time as well, there are an infinite number of opportunities to practice this. It's just we don't. And Yogananda once said that it's the lack of spiritual adventuresomeness and lassitude, laziness, that makes most people not develop these capabilities, because people just don't give any effort to it. So that is a key thing to understand too. So this is the basic knowledge you have to understand. And then people say, what does this have to do with Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind? It has everything to do with it. All right, because that's really what, if you understand the foundation that consciousness is omnipresent, and there's a practice that can be done as often as you have time to do it, but then in every waking moment you have an opportunity to practice this newfound capability of mind, of intuition, of precognition, of remote viewing, whatever you want to call it. And then you become more and more of a master of your own universe, your own conscious universe. And you begin to realize that this awareness and this ability that's within you is also within every ET and every fellow human. But the interstellar civilizations have developed it to the point that they have, and I'll leave you with this before our break, two things, TAC and CAT, technology-assisted consciousness. So they have technologies that assist their consciousness at remote viewing. Now, in 1956, this was by then they had studied this, and I know the man, he's passed away, but in the 90s I knew him, he was in his 80s, who had developed an electronic system where they could hook up a human and they would facilitate remote viewing instantly. That was the real action, not MK Ultra. It was all electronics, not drugs. But that was a very deep black program. But ETs have that as a routine means of functioning because they're dealing with interstellar distances. Now they also have consciousness-assisted technologies, CAT, and that's going the other direction, where your consciousness interfaces with the technology and activates the technology. So there's a seamless interface between consciousness and thought, and that's energy that the mystics called astral energy, and their technologies, and their communication systems, and their spacecraft. And then remember this, that the actual ET craft, they're seamless, they are conscious, they have AI to the point of being conscious themselves, and they take on the consciousness of the occupants. So when you have an encounter with an actual ET craft, you will feel the consciousness of the occupants even before you see an ET. And they are bio-nano conscious machines. So that when the ones have crashed, they actually, some of the men that got very early to some of the ones that have crashed would actually see it like a time lapse of a wound, the skin trying to heal itself, like this. So they're actually living. So the craft are actually, they're technological, but they're living and they're conscious. Does this make sense? And they're connected to the bioelectric conscious field of the ET occupants. Probably enough till we take a break, huh? I told you we're just going to scratch the surface here. Imagine a week of this. So why don't we take about a 15-minute break for some water or bathroom, and then we'll get back, and then we're going to show some images and practice these protocols.